Okay, welcome back to the channel. I focus a lot of time on fundamentals during my private lessons, and how to work the single jig correctly is a big part of it. But surprisingly, I've spent more time than I expected explaining hookset mechanics to people, and also how to fight and land fluke from shore.
Keep your rod bent. Keep your rod bent. Perfect. Keep it tight though.
Based on that experience from the private lessons, I decided to deep dive into this topic. And by the end of the video, you'll understand exactly how to set the hook with a single jig and also why you should do it that way. Of all the fluke related content you'll consume this year, this is one you should really pay attention to. So first things first, you should always stand square to your cast. This will give you the best foundation for your hook set, which really starts at your feet and ends with the rotation at the hips and shoulders. Here my jig is gliding back towards the bottom with my rod pointed almost straight up at the sky when I get bit. Certainly not a big fish, but the mechanics are the same regardless. So watch here, I get bit. Now I'm going to reel down my slack until my rod is pointing almost at the fish and then sweep across my shoulder, across my opposite shoulder. Notice also how I lean forward onto my left foot and then pivot my weight ending up on my right foot. That transfer creates even more power for my hook set. The tendency when you get bit is to react immediately, even though 90% of your bites will occur when your rod is in a high position. This is something you must resist, as a half-ass hook set with only your wrist and arm behind it will seriously harm your landing percentage, especially with bigger fluke, something I'll go into more detail later on. But the key here is to never be surprised by a bite, and when you do get bit, reel down your slack by using the weight of the fish as a guide. In other words, don't drop your rod tip faster than you can pick up your slack. I'll slow it down here. Now pay attention to my rod tip. I get bit. Now you can see that it's slightly loaded on the way down. Again, I'm using the weight of the fish to lightly load my rod tip while I'm picking up line. I'm staying tight to that fish the entire time. Now with spinning gear, I'm always using the rod to pump the fish in, and the correct way to do that is once again using the weight of the fish as a guide to reel down in between rod pumps. Be smooth about it. From the fish's perspective, they should never feel any acceleration or deceleration during the fight, just a smooth glide all the way in. Okay, last clip from this point of view. Once again, I'm squaring up to the cast. That way I'm never caught out of position when a fish bites. I'm visualizing my jig doing its thing down there. I'm picturing a doormat fluke tracking it and then opening its maw to suck it down. I'm never surprised when I get bit. When I do get bit, I calmly reel against the weight of the fish until my rod is pointed right at her and slam home that big hook set with the weight of my entire body behind it. And it's a sea robin. Anyway, next up is some footage I recorded using props. Hopefully I do a good enough job explaining the reason for each step I outlined for the hook set so far. Okay, so a big fluke eats your jig and your jig is gliding, right? It's gliding down. Your rod is in the high position. Fluke comes up off the bottom and just engulfs your jig. Then it settles back on the bottom And your rod is still in the high position when you felt that bite. And a lot of times, your first reaction is just to yank. Well, two things. You have slack line, and you only have like a 15-20 degree range of motion on the hook set, right? There's no full pivot from your front to your back feet, no body rotation. It's just basically wrist and elbow, and you're just doing that. All that's doing on a big fluke. On a small fluke, you might get away with it. On a big fluke, fluke over 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pounds, their jaw pressure is so strong that when you just do that kind of limp wrist kind of hook set, all you're doing is that. You never broke the jig through its clamped jaws, all right? Or I should say the jig head. And the big fluke will come all the way to shore, all the way to your net if you're on a kayak or boat, like this. They're funny in that way. I don't know many other fish that do that kind of thing where you can fight it for 80 feet, 100 feet on nothing but a clamped jig head in its mouth, just tension. They will come to the boat and you can see a big fluke, boat side or right by the shore, open its jaw and your whole jig flies out. And you think what happened is it was skin hooked, or somehow during its thrashing, your hook pulled out of its skin. That's not the case. You never got a hook in that fish. The thing with the jig head, or any kind of jig that has a lead or tungsten head in front, is that actually blocks your hook point from penetrating. That needs to come out of the jaws before your hook can penetrate. Your rod is in a high position. That is when you reel down using the weight of the fish, you reel down until your rod's pointing at the fish. What that's doing is you're sliding your jig, you're positioning your jig like so. Now your rod is pointing at the fish, and now you can do your big hook set from this position all the way across your shoulder, either shoulder. When you do that, you have enough force, you're generating enough force to break the jig head through its jaws, and then the hook point is free to catch something. Okay, I hope that made sense. Now, let's talk through how to fight and land fluke from shore. As mentioned, an inadequate hook set is the #1 reason people drop big fluke, but your rod angle and timing are the remaining pieces to round out your landing percentage game. And with a single jig, your landing percentage should be close to 100%, especially after a solid hook set. Now once again, the rod tip is loaded on the way down. I set the hook hard over my right shoulder, and that's the rod angle I'm going to keep for the first part of the fight. The same basic angle that came off the hook set. Also notice the load in my rod blank. The amount of bend never really changes, even though I'm pumping this fish. I'm reeling down tight against the fish's weight each time, and every lift is performed with a smooth, even pressure. As the fish gets closer in, I start flattening out my rod angle to the side until it's virtually parallel to the water surface. This is important because the last thing you want is to pull the fluke's head out of water. Now this is a decent fish, and once she's in the surf zone, I'm never pulling against the receding waves. You see right there, I'm kind of stalling out. I'm keeping constant pressure on the fish, waiting for the next set of waves to help push this fish onto shore. So here I'm just stalling, I see the wave coming. I'm actually walking forward a bit, keeping constant pressure. And this wave is the one I'm waiting for. As soon as it curls up over the fluke, I feel the water pressure change. Now I'm pulling. I'm actually walking backwards and just dragging this fluke onto dry sand. Now, here I'm on a lake dragging a football jig for bass. Very different fishery, but as long as you're dealing with the hunk of lead molded onto a hook, the jig hook set we talked about in this video applies. And finally, as I run this clip of me experimenting with jigging fluke off straight fluorocarbon, as well as a new retrieve, let me end by saying this. All the repeatable actions in fishing, casting, jigging, the hook set, the rod pump, these are all part of the fundamentals of fishing. There's a lot of happy talk among fishermen. When you land a fish, it's all skill. When you lose one, it's bad luck. There's some element of truth to that, but for the most part, people don't focus nearly enough on honing their mechanics when they're out there with the rod in their hand. My goal is to always fish clean. That means hooking every fish that bites and landing every fish you hook. An impossible goal, but something to strive for. The more you practice these various mechanics, the more repeatable and automatic they become. Set the hook on every fish like it's a double digit, and fight every dink to the shoreline as if it's a world record. Develop those muscle memories, and it will serve you well for the rest of your fishing career. Okay, thanks for watching, guys. I hope that was helpful, and I'll catch you on the next one.